Live Fit Podcast, episode 51, with adventure cyclist Ryan Correy.
Anywhere between 16 to 21 days, and it might take some people upwards of 3 times that. So the uniqueness is that it's fully self-supported, so you're carrying whatever you want on the bike, including your insecurities. So, sleeping pad and cook stove or whatever you want to take. And it's just kind of you in the elements. I love it. It's like being a caveman. It's elemental.
You're listening to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson. Here, we'll talk about all things related to good health, fitness, food, fat loss, and the mind-body connection.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I am your host, Glenn Johnson. Thank you all for listening. This is episode 51. Today I have adventure cyclist Ryan Correy. He has recently finished writing a book called A Purpose Ridden. It's available on Amazon. I've been reading it. It's really good. I can't wait to tell you more about it. But first, I would like to take a moment to commemorate today. Today is Memorial Day. I'm recording this and releasing it on Memorial Day, and the meaning of Memorial Day is to honor those fallen American soldiers. So let's take just a moment of silence to honor the people that have fought and lost their lives to keep us free. All right. Now, some of you know that I was in the Navy, and I joined when I was 19 years old, and it changed my life for the better. It was really the absolute best decision I could have made, bar none. Nothing else even came close to it. So I'm really glad I did it. It was very difficult. It was very tough. I didn't go to any battles or conflicts at the time. I was really very lucky. But even so, I would have willingly, and it could have ended up, bad for me. But as it was, it turned out really, really well. I learned a lot. I became a man, and I've brought that forward to every stage of my life since. It's not something that I ever forget, and the lessons that I learned there were really worthwhile. So I fully support it, but once again, I do honor those that have given their lives or their limbs or any other injuries, long-lasting injuries that have really affected their life going forward. I feel really sorry for that, but once again, it's a volunteer service, so we do it willingly, but they still need our support and our respect. So thank you, American soldiers. I salute you. Today, I'm going to be speaking with a guy I met out on a hot July day on the last third of the race across Oregon. His name's Ryan Correy. We had ridden 250 going on 300 miles at this point of a 535-mile race. When I came across this guy, and I saw him up ahead of me, and as soon as I see somebody up ahead of me, they're like a rabbit. And I kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going, and I finally caught up to him after about an hour. I hadn't seen this guy all the day before, so he took off faster than me and kept on going. But over the night, I gained on him, caught him in the morning. The sun had just barely come up. When I pulled next to him, we chatted a little bit, and then I moved on. Then, not too much longer later, maybe an hour later, he pulls up next to me. We chatted a little bit, and that sort of thing continued for nearly the rest of the day. For a good 100, 150 miles, we were leapfrogging each other and chatting. And during these chats, we became friends. I found out that he had started cycling when he was 13 years old. He rode across the country of Canada with his father. And then on another adventure, he rode from the very northernmost point of America to the very southernmost point of America, so Alaska to Argentina, solo on a bicycle, and not speaking any of the other language other than English all the way down there. So quite an adventure for a young guy. We stayed in touch. I followed him as he did race across America, attempted a world record attempt on a spin bike, and competed in the Tour Divide. Now, he's going to talk about these things during this interview, but one of the main reasons why I brought him on is because he just finished writing a book called A Purpose RIDDEN, and I've been reading it, and it's really good. He's a really good writer. It's a really thick book, actually, and best of all, he's going to give you a copy. One lucky listener who leaves a review on iTunes by the end of June will receive a free copy of his book, A Purpose RIDDEN. Stand by to the end of the show and we'll give you more details on how you can win this book. But right now, I'd like to get on with my interview with Ryan Correy. Ryan, how are you doing?
Well, Glenn, you should say in the interview that you smoked me on the race, so really we should be interviewing you. But other than that, I'm doing very well. I'm in the last couple weeks of my training for a big race called the Tour Divide, so I'm in peak condition, nervous, excited, anxious, but happy to be on the call and happy to be supporting what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to have you. It's good to talk to you again. Like I had told you before, I've been following you on Facebook and your progress and everything you've done, and we've emailed a few times here and there, but it's good to talk to you again. You did the Tour Divide once before. What's like 2 years ago, last year?
It was 2012 that I did. So that was my rookie year. The race actually hasn't been going for that many years. I believe it was 2008 or 2009 it started, so it was still in its very early years when I got involved.
Mm-hmm. Just for everybody who doesn't know, the Tour Divide starts in Canada and follows the Rockies all the way down to Mexico.
Yeah, it's a self-supported race. It's pretty unique in the respect that there is no official start list. There's no race entry fee. Essentially, the rule is the second Friday of every June, a group of riders show up at the YMCA in Banff, and someone says go, and really it's the first person to Mexico wins. And everyone follows pre-designated GPS routes, and you follow a road or a set of paths that go up and over the Continental Divide several times over the course of just under 3,000 miles.
Wow.
And, a winning time would be anywhere between 16 to 21 days. And, it might take some people upwards of 3 times that.
Wow.
So the uniqueness is that it's fully self-supported. So you're carrying whatever you want on the bike, including your insecurities. So, sleeping pad and cook stove or whatever you want to take. And it's just kind of you in the elements. I love it. It's like being a caveman. It's elemental.
That's awesome. I could totally get into something like that. Now, since it's unofficial, there's no permits, is there any problems with the routes you guys are taking?
You do go through some national parks and that, and just from organizing my own supported tours behind the scenes, I can say that there's a bit of a gray area that's being crossed, and they actually haven't released the route, and I think we're on 23 days to go yet. So there's a lot of rookie riders going, when are we going to find out what the actual route is? And I think part of the reason they do that is because they don't want too many people knowing where the riders are going. So there is a bit of a gray area there, but I think at the same time, the people that live in these areas and work in these areas know the race well enough to just kind of turn a blind eye to it. Right.
And are you do you have a GPS unit attached to your bike? Because I remember following you, 3 years ago on a website, watching you. Like every morning I get up to see where you were, and every night I would check and see how far you've gone that day.
Yeah, so the official website, although when I say that, I should put out the disclaimers that it doesn't get updated very often, and part of that is a bit of a barrier to entry on purpose. But the website is tourdivide.org, and on there they've got links to a leaderboard, which if you get it set up right, usually a few days before, they ask everyone to send in their information for their spot trackers. And spot tracker is a GPS that sends a signal. So it's not like a traditional unit in that it provides mapping. It's just meant to send a signal. And essentially you go to this leaderboard, and that's how the race is tracked. Is everyone shows up as a little blue dot on the map, and at any point you can see if they're riding, they're moving, if they've stopped to sleep, and it becomes a bit of a habit for people in the know to just constantly be checking that leaderboard.
Cool. Very cool. That's fascinating. So I know since I last saw you in Eastern Oregon, you've gone on to do some bigger and better things, and you did the Race Across Oregon with the intent of qualifying for RAM, Race Across America, which you finally did. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Race Across America, just getting to the start line, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is a monumental effort in itself. It's not something you can necessarily just buy your way into. You have to qualify, and the standard is pretty gnarly. And I tried. I believe it was in early 2007 was my first qualifier. It was down in Sebring, Florida, pancake flat, and I believe at the time I had to ride something like 625 kilometers in 24 hours, and I missed it by, I think I missed it by like 50 kilometers or something.
Oh, man.
And that was supposedly the easiest qualifier. But what I learned was I really tune in more to the challenge of hills. I like the very obvious challenge of, I have to get to the top of that hill, and then when I get to the top of that hill, I'll coast down the bottom. Whereas Sebring was totally flat, and it was just monotonous for 24 hours. And
yeah, it sounds horrible.
You could see the speed just declining. So I went from not qualifying at the easiest qualifier to qualifying at what is, I believe at the time was said to be one of the hardest qualifiers because of all the climbing in Oregon, going up and over Mount Hood and a bunch of hills in between, and then also the heat once you get further inland, which was just intense, and that's where we kind of battled it out for a little while. But that wasn't necessarily me going for a win. That was me just going to qualify.
Right.
And I think you had to finish within like 15% of the winner's time. And I remember the last shot up. So you go over Mount Hood, and then the race finishes by going right back up to Mount Hood. So you do a big circle out inland. And I remember I finished in like the middle of the night. And I remember you get away from all cell service and kind of all awareness of the race. And I remember my crew just kind of frantically encouraging me up the last steep pitch, and not really knowing until the last kilometer that I'd actually qualified. And my father was actually saying the other day that of all the things he's seen me do, including RAM, he thought that was actually probably the one of the most hard fought and most earned. We'll call it wins in its own right.
It is. Anybody who finishes that race is a winner. There was a guy that finished 3 hours ahead of me, and yes, he beat me, but I feel so victorious that I finished it all, let alone as close to him as I did. So I think it's great. And just for the listeners who aren't familiar with Race Across Oregon, it's a 535-mile race. And at the time, it started in Portland, and it went east and up and over the side of Mount Hood, and then kind of south and east and made a big loop, and then ended back up at Timberline, which is a little ski resort. I guess it's not that little. It's a ski resort up on Mount Hood, and it's actually the building that they filmed the outdoor scenes of the movie The Shining. So when you see the movie The Shining and you see the scenes of this hotel up in the mountains, that's Timberline Lodge. And so it has a certain ominous, eerie appeal to it. And it was pretty awesome. It was an awesome race. So I love that race. In fact, I'm doing it. I'm crewing for a friend of mine in a couple of weeks. Not a couple of weeks, but in mid-July, we're going to go out there. And so I'm going to be crewing for him as he does it solo.
Awesome. Yeah, and I was just thinking as you were saying that, the cruel joke for me is I love The Shining. It's probably up there in one of my top 10 movies. But when I finished, in the middle of the night, I pretty much fell asleep almost right away as soon as they put me down in the chair, and I never saw any of that. So
bummer.
I'll have to get back at some point.
I was just telling my class today, we were talking about endurance activities, and I was telling them the theoretical ability of the muscles in the aerobic state to go forever as long as they have fuel, electrolytes, and oxygen. And when I finished Race Across Oregon, I felt so awesome, and I was just really so tuned with what I was doing. I wanted to turn around and go back and do it over again in reverse. And even the next day, I still felt like I could have done it. I felt amazing. I was barely sore at all. I had a lot of energy. I got like 6 hours sleep, and I woke up fresh and ready to go. Come on, let's go for a ride. It's kind of funny.
Well, I can admit that I did not. So this must be the feeling when you put the hurt on the Canadian kids, how it feels to beat on them and to come out victorious, and you just feel so great about yourself.
Yeah, when you just are in the zone, it is just magic. It's really, I can't explain it any other way. So how was RAM? You did Race Across America, which is way longer than Race Across Oregon. So that was, 3,000 miles compared to 500?
Yeah, so Race Across America was the following June, I believe it was, so 2008. And the story out of that was, I went into that with a bit of an ego. I'm not going to lie on that one. Youngest guy in the race, average age for a lot of these ultra events is early 40s. I'm sure you've probably found that too.
Yep.
And, I came into that race, and I think I was 20, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 25 when I did that. And so the youngest by far, and, naturally they had these, media crew on site that would follow the race. And, they kind of started pitching me as one of their stories, like the young kid that's done all these interesting things in Alaska, Argentina, and all these big things, and maybe he's the dark horse, right?
Right.
And meanwhile on the side is legend of Yuri Robic, who's coming back for however many victories, and really that's where the attention should have been. But anyways, they put a little too much attention on me, and that got to my head. And as soon as the gun went off from Oceanside, California, I shot off the start line like the prize stallion. And interestingly enough, this was my first introduction to Hammer Nutrition, who I now work for behind the scenes. But this is my first introduction, and I didn't still quite know how to use all that stuff properly. Like this was me kind of getting over the Gatorade and Powerade, and I was just kind of getting into the healthy nutrition and long-form nutrition.
Right.
And I think I did the first 100 miles on like one water bottle and no electrolytes.
Oh, my God.
And part of that was missing my crew lunch. So essentially you go over the coastal range and you descend down into part of, I believe it's Death Valley. So like the hottest part of the world and like the hottest time of the year.
Right.
And I think I was like in second or third place at this time. Like I was doing pretty good. But as soon as we descended down into the lower desert there, I had a full body cramp like I've never experienced ever in my life, and never again since then. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the race honestly was just trying to recover from that and just more or less hold on. Which is kind of mentally demoralizing when you think of, this is the first, 200 miles, and you still have pretty well the whole country to still to go.
Yeah.
So it was humbling because I drifted backwards pretty quickly, and it became a race to more or less just finish. Mm-hmm. So there's the checkpoints along the way, and then all the way up until the finish line, you have a 12-day cutoff, which I can't remember the math, but I think you got to be doing somewhere in the range of 400 miles a day just to finish.
Right.
And so I came in at 11 days, 21 hours, just underneath the radar, which, as I've learned from, other people have done it, it's not out of the realm of reason for, a lot of people to finish in that range. But when you're in it, oh man, the worst thing that can happen is, your crew kind of yelling at you and frantically running around in the 11th hour after you're totally spent. But that was a pretty humbling experience for me. I've done some pretty, what, some would call epic things. And I remember finishing that and feeling more proud for my crew than I did for myself, partly because, 3/4 of the race, I really threw in the mental towel. I just told the crew I quit. Like, I told them I'm not tough enough, I quit. And They really had to prod me on to the finish. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I was very proud of my crew on that one. So it's a complete 180 from that kind of experience to the Tour Divide, which is completely solo. And it's a 24-hour-a-day race also. But you have to get yourself to the finish, which I've learned to appreciate a bit more.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this or not, but I was there at the start line as you were doing RAM.
Yeah, no, I do remember that.
And I remember seeing all those people, and I was really, it was really awesome, and I was wishing in a way that I was about to do it, because it's, the race of all races, the hardest race in the world. I would say it's harder than Tour de France, because they get to sleep at night and they're only riding for a few hours a day. And then I was, of course, following you online, and I saw you take off, and I went, oh, no, too fast. But of course you couldn't hear me. So, but I'm glad you finally found Hammer and straightened out your nutrition, because now that you mention it, I think that's what held you back at Race Across Oregon too. You're having some nutrition problems, and it is a huge deal. And I've been studying sports nutrition for a long time, and through these races I've done, I'm not super fast, but I am pretty tenacious, and I don't quit easily, and I put a lot of time and effort into proper nutrition, which includes hydration and electrolytes and the right kind of fuel. And I've seen so many of my competitors drop out because they've missed one of those factors, the hydration, electrolytes, and fuel, and they just can't go on. And when you're working right at the threshold of your fight or flight mechanism, your sympathetic nervous system, your intestines will shut down. So the trick is to pedal as hard as you can, but not so much that your intestines shut down, because you need to be able to get that water and the nutrients through the gut wall and into the bloodstream. And certain fuels and foods and compounds work better than others. And I know you know all that now because you're a Hammer representative. So would you tell us just really briefly what you do with Hammer? I know you give talks, but are you giving them sports nutrition talks, like how to fuel with Hammer, or what sorts of things are you doing?
Yeah, so my role has evolved quite a bit, just with my own interests with Hammer. So Hammer Nutrition in Canada. So I come to it from a practical learning standpoint. So basically having gone from, what is it like to do the Race Across Oregon on Gatorade and Ensure, getting mouth sores and,
right.
GI distress from all the sugar and things like that, to, the Race Across America and really learning about electrolyte capsules and, how they can help bring you back from full body cramp. So I bring a lot of practical lessons like this into my talks. I don't claim to be a fueling expert per se, but just sharing the knowledge that I have. And, it's a little intimidating because you just kind of assume that everyone's got it figured out. But the more talks you do, you realize that even most pro athletes don't really have a handle on their nutrition. And, like yourself, I've done much better in races in the last several years, just really based on nutrition and learning how to pace myself better. I did a 24-hour mountain bike race last year, and I told my crew, I said, I know I'm not the fastest rider here, but come 12 hours, in my head, that's where the race is going to kick in. Because all these guys are going to burn out.
Yep.
They're probably not going to be feeling right. And almost like clockwork, it happened. These guys were in their tent sleeping for 2-3 hours, and
nice.
that's when I put in the win.
Nice.
And just stuck to the nutrition plan. It's not always the most exciting.
No.
Having hammer Perpetuum for 24 hours straight, but
perpetually.
Literally, yeah. But that's what this sort of thing is meant for. And it's been humbling to acknowledge that, but I still consider it, especially when you're talking with triathletes, that fourth discipline, that not a lot of them, unfortunately, way too many people do not have a good handle on. And it's scary to see Ironman athletes that show up, the day of and, haven't necessarily trained to something or are using a drink that's super sugary. It's kind of counterintuitive. So, or
they experiment during the race.
Yeah, and you kind of use the feed stations like a buffet, and don't have a strategy for it, right? So yeah, long story short, I am the quote unquote the fueling guru for Hammer Nutrition Canada, and giving talks all across the country, and I also manage our community engagement. So sponsorships with athletes and events, the talks that I do, and the social media, and all the fun stuff.
Well, that's great. I'll make sure I include a link to you and to your Hammer, to not only your own personal website, but to your Hammer site, because I know I have a lot of Canadian listeners, eh? Sorry,
great. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
My wife's Canadian, eh? So so that makes me half Canadian, eh? All right.
Get it in.
Okay, I'm done. So one more thing I just wanted to mention before I go on with your book. You had a world record attempt. Do you want to tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, I've had a few. I've unofficially held a record for cycling from Alaska, Argentina. So that's a time record. The record at the time was 140 days. I did it in 131.
Wow.
I won't tell you where that one went, but I will say that I describe it in great detail in the book.
Okay.
And then the other one that I did, I've kind of always had this hankering for a world record. I don't exactly know where that comes from, but I'd like to think everyone is sort of the best at something. And It's not necessarily me trying to prove that I'm the best to everyone else, but it's kind of to myself saying, this is my niche. I finally found it. Mm-hmm. And I was teaching spin classes at a gym for 3 years that I was managing. And at the end of one of my mountain bike seasons, I thought, hey, I might take on this stationary spinning world record that I'd heard about. And it was for consecutive amount of time spent spinning.
Wow.
And the record at the time was 8 days, 8 hours. And the rule was you had to always be pedaling. You had to ride 12 miles in an hour, which is not incredibly fast or far, but
right.
As the days mount, it gets to be challenging.
It fell fast.
And and then every hour you got 5 minutes off the bike that you could use right then and there, or bank. So if you ever wanted to sleep for any amount of time, you can imagine the amount of hours you'd have to log before you could, just do 20 minutes, for example.
Holy
which was
cow.
my average. My average sleep bike was 20. We've actually found that 30 was too long.
Oh, really?
So I got to, I'm trying to remember what it was now. It was 6 days, 20-something hours. And essentially what happened was I was hallucinating so bad. I didn't know who I was, what I was doing. I felt very threatened. I couldn't understand why the crew was keeping me on the bike. Or they couldn't justify it to me in a way that made sense to me. And essentially they couldn't keep me on the bike. And I missed out on the records by not too much at that point, and that was 2010, and my feet have not recovered since then. I incurred a lot of nerve damage from my hips down, essentially, but that is for the most part come back. It's my feet that have kind of stayed messed up from that.
So you rode across the country 3,000 miles in just a shy of 12 days. And then you spent, 6 days on a stationary bike and screwed up your body?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like I did REM, and here I am thinking, I get to do it inside, essentially, protected from the elements, fully controlled environment, air conditioning, support crew right there. You can have a TV set up. There were some things that kind of felt violating at times. Like you had to have witnesses watching you basically 24 hours a day. It was all broadcast online with multiple cameras. So, if I picked my nose, basically,
everyone saw.
100 people watching at any time saw it. So, 2 days in, I was like still killing each hour, like without an issue. And the going thought and what my downfall was is I'd had a really bad flu. It was like a week before.
Oh, no.
Kind of naively, like I really pushed through to make it happen when I shouldn't have. We think my body was still pretty fatigued from that.
Right.
But I got kind of sucked into the thought that I had all these people that had taken time off work to volunteer, whether as crew or witnesses. And it was just such a huge endeavor. And I didn't want to have to reschedule all that with all these people. So I pushed ahead with it when I probably shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And I paid the price. I started going down for sleep breaks and coming out of it still on a hallucination, and they would progressively get worse, to the point where, I've heard of RAM guys kind of hallucinating, and I thought I had hallucinated. Like you kind of think you see something in the corner of your eye.
Yeah.
It's late at night. Your vision's kind of foggy. You're like, maybe I'm kind of hallucinating. Like, no. Like, hallucination in my mind is I could have a lucid conversation with you. We're in a gym setting, but in my mind's eye, what I see is we're on a spaceship and we're floating around the Earth. And to me, it's perfectly normal. And it would take me like an hour or two to come out of that. And I'd have to ask, something doesn't feel right. I know we just had a conversation, and you could see my mind really starting to slip. So that's, out of all the things that I've done, that one has messed me up the most.
Wow. And you had some adrenal fatigue, right? Because I recall it took you a long time to recover, and then you even had to drop out of a race 6 months later because you had a adrenal shutdown. Is that correct?
Well, that's one of the going theories. I never really got what I would say was the right diagnosis that fit everything. It took me about 3 months to start to get all of the nerve feeling back in my legs. For a couple of weeks, I didn't have really any feeling in my legs. And then when it did come back, it was like the worst fiery nerve pain that the worst pain I could really wish on anyone. Like, I've really gotten a new appreciation for athletes, or really anyone that deals with chronic nerve pain like that. It really messes with your head and it would keep me up all hours. I lost a ton of weight. I couldn't work. And through that process, your body's only still going downhill because you're not sleeping, so you're not recovering really at all.
Yeah.
But before I had done the spin attempt, I'd actually qualified to represent the national team at a marathon mountain bike race, World Championships in Italy. And naively, again, I kind of kept pushing to do it just because I'd qualified, and I quickly realized that this is probably my one and only shot that I'm ever going to get at this level.
Right.
Because I kind of had started to see a bit of permanent damage set in as far as, it really felt like I didn't have any fast twitch fibers anymore. I just had that slow twitch. And with my adrenals completely shot, I said, whatever, I'm just going to go and do it. And I ended up getting 3 flat tires and, not being able to keep up and basically touring the Italian countryside. So it was a really expensive, 4-day trip.
Right.
But, I did it. Like, I don't know. Some would say that it wasn't the best of moves, but I got to represent my country. And, at least once in my life, I can say I did that.
Well, that's cool. And I'm wondering, in hindsight, was your spin bike world record attempt worth it?
The $1 million question. I remember in the months after, for a while there, like everyone just assumed, you're a young guy, you'll bounce back from this quick. And that was half the battle with doctors too. Like, I think that's where it kind of went undiagnosed, like to the degree that it probably should have been. It's like, you got some nerve pain, whatever, you'll get this back, whatever. So we, as this, these conversations were going on, people were already kind of chatting about, okay, when we do this again, this is how we do it. This is how we change things up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was going along with it, and I was so close. Like that's the kind of the thing that was annoying about it.
Yeah.
But as the months wore on, and I really saw more pain and more damage set in, I realized like that was probably going to be the one time I was ever going to be able to do it. For one, and probably never. I probably shouldn't do it. I'd probably lose a lot of faith from family and friends that were concerned. They wouldn't support it. So was it worth it? If I didn't take into account the effect that I saw it have on the community, I would say no. Record was not achieved again.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, no. It was a failure. But at the time, I was living in a small farming community in central Alberta, so a small town called Sylvan Lake. And as the days wore on, so I had, at any given time, I had, probably 8 people around me. And then a whole gym, of a couple hundred members circling in and out every day. So as the days wore on, that audience kind of grew more and more, and the people that were supporting grew more and more. And it created a really interesting ripple effect that I didn't necessarily know fully while I was doing it for various reasons. But, after the fact, just learning about all these members that started coming back to the gym. And, I think one of the biggest emotional impacts that I had, and the reason why I would say it was worth it, was people that I'd never had contact with. So, in the endurance world, you're your own kind of group. And then, there's another group in the gym, which are kind of the heavy lifting. I think in the book I refer to them as the gronks. So the guys that, just barely touch the bike as a warm up because they're afraid of burning all their muscle away. Right. And these guys I hadn't talked to in like 3 years, or they didn't necessarily respect what I was doing. I remember one of them coming down, in one of my harder moments, and I didn't really want to talk to people because I was, I was feeling sick on the bike. And I remember he came up and talked to me, and he was in tears, this huge guy, like pushing probably 250 pounds, and just said, hold on, brother, like you're doing something great. And you started to see that kind of reaction with a lot of people.
You're giving them hope.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, Glenn, I've done some things in my life where I tried to create that feeling. I did a trip around North America in 2002 with the intention of raising money for charity, and I remember a media group kind of hyped me up as this media darling. I was 18, 19 years old, and you're going to be all over the place, and people are going to give you a ton of money. And that trip really kind of kicks me in the gut because I was on the road for like 86 days, and I went 14,000 kilometers around Canada, the U.S., and I raised like $1,000 on the road. And most of the money I raised was from a fundraising dinner. And I really realized that you can't pretend to make people care. Like, you got to really be the real deal.
Right.
So it was interesting because the first time that spin attempt, you know, it was 100% real, and it wasn't something that I tried to manufacture or create. It just sort of happened on its own.
Yeah.
So on that front, in a roundabout answer, I'll say that it was a success, but I have no future plans to tackle it again.
I understand. So you've mentioned your book a couple of times, and I've told everybody that you have a new book coming out, and we've talked for about a half an hour now, and I still don't know what your book's about. So how about this? Who is going to buy your book and read your book?
Well, the publisher thinks it's going to be one of those good stories for fathers and sons. And I really have to do my job to say that it's not a cycling story, but a story told on the back of a bike, because I don't really get into a lot of technical things about bicycle racing or, you know, doing these big events. It's just kind of the lessons learned along the way.
Right.
But one of the big things that I hadn't mentioned yet was the father and son element. So my father, the book starts with my father kind of pushing me into doing a trip with him across the country at age 13. And at the time, he called it manhood training. And, you know, this was a chance for me to see the country and kind of open my eyes to adventure and travel and interacting with the world. You know, as the years have gone by since, you know, I really feel for younger generations that are getting sucked more and more to social networks that are all about networking, but are pretty much the exact opposite. You lose the real interactions with people. So here I am at 13 going across the country with my father, and, you know, kind of here's my first introduction into this journey of this whole book about manhood. And, you know, we're having to ask strangers for directions, you know, for meals, for places to stay, and, you know, getting across the country and really opening my eyes to how big the place can be, but in small increments, you know, big things, those big, hairy, ambitious goals can be chipped away at.
Yeah.
And I really got sucked into the idea of, you know, for a little while there, of the bigger and better idea. So, you know, it started with the trip around North America to raise $1 million for charity, and pretty well got laughed at. But, you know, then doing Alaska to Argentina, so the longest road in the world, the Pan American Highway.
Wow. And
bringing that story full circle with the race across America. And interestingly enough, my father and I had seen the race across America on TV when we were going across the country that first year. And it was one of those things that was kind of just unique to watch because it looked like a train wreck. You'd never want to do it, but you couldn't look away. You wondered like how these people with neck braces are riding across the country at all hours and still managing to stay upright and watching grown men cry. And now all of a sudden it seemed within the realm of possibility, and having my father come back to be the crew chief and be a part of that journey. And then breaking out to do my own solo endeavors, you know, including the Tour Divide and that sort of thing. So the father-son element is probably the most important part of the story to me. And I think it's something that a lot of fathers and sons will be able to relate to also. You know, I'm pretty open with, you know, the lessons that my father taught me, you know, the fights that we had along the way, and, you know, things that were not always easy to write about. And, you know, the book took longer to write just because, you know, my father and I actually had a falling out for a while because he couldn't believe that I was writing about him in such a way, but I was trying to be honest to the story and how I remembered it. and now he just actually finished reading it the other day. So I think, to me, it's a story for fathers and sons.
Wow.
But cyclists too will also appreciate it, and the fact that it covers many of what some would call the biggest cycling challenges one could take on.
Yeah, and you were 13 at the time, right?
The first trip, 13 years old, and that's where the book starts.
That's pretty amazing. And honestly, I'm glad to hear you didn't sugarcoat it, and you're telling an honest, real story. And it's sad I don't know what went on, and I haven't read your book yet. I can't wait to read it. But there's always strife between people, especially if you're out on the road doing something like that. There's going to be some arguments and disagreements and hurt feelings and whatever it might be. And to write about that in an honest way allows the reader to see, oh, hey, yeah, I'm not such a freak because I, hated my dad for a few years for something he did, or whatever the situation might be. So I think it's probably really helpful, and I imagine it has a happy ending, right?
Yeah. So like the point of the book in my eyes is that, my father was very tough on me. Like at no point was he trying to be my friend per se, but more like a parent or a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't always create the greatest relationship. But as a 32-year-old man now, I look back and I can say, yeah, he's a hard ass here and there, but like look where I am now. I'm following my passion. I stuck with cycling. I like to believe I'm a moral person with, strong beliefs, and a lot of that comes from my father. And I look around at a lot of people I know, and I wouldn't say they necessarily have that same foundation. So I say, that's the biggest takeaway from the book for me, is that in the end, that I appreciate what he did for me. But the hard thing for me as a writer, in writing a memoir and trying to be honest about all that stuff, is, for my father to read it through all of it, all the way to the end, not just get hung up on the controversial parts, and the same for reviewers. Like I listened to a review the other day that someone did, and man, I'd be horrified if my father heard that story, because they don't at all talk about the father-son journey and how it comes together, and then it's all just sensationalized bits about him and I fighting and how much of a hard-ass he was. And I'm like, oh my God, point missed completely. But, I can't say that, because that's what that one person got out of it. But, for me, it's the father and son journey, and, boy becoming man. It's the universal story that the father and son will appreciate, but I think the mother and daughter could appreciate just the same.
Yeah. There's a tricky dynamic with mothers and daughters. There's often strife or competition and jealousy and things like that. So, but I imagine is some crossover as well.
Yes, in the story, my mother and sister are forever the feudal referee in the middle, caught in the middle. Unfortunately, I look forward to writing a second book where they're included much more as the encouraging force. Very cool. While we're on the subject, Glenn, I'd love to offer one of your listeners a copy of A Purpose Ridden. That's the title of the book, and I've got a copy headed your way now. Oh, fantastic. That's great. You know what I'll do? I think I will have a little, like a drawing. People can leave their names by leaving a review on iTunes for the Live Fit podcast. And in fact, they can find it really easily by going to livefitlean.com/iTunes, and it'll take them directly to the page for this podcast. And if they leave a review between the release date, I'll tell you what, I'll give it 4 weeks from the release date of this podcast, which will bring it into about mid-June. And at that time, I will randomly poll everybody who's left a review and send a book their way. Thanks, Ryan. That's really cool of you. Yeah, no, happy to do it. Well, Ryan, this has really simply been amazing. I love hearing about all of your venture stories, but I'm sure a lot of the listeners are asking, why the heck do you do this? Now, I'm not going to ask, why don't you have a desk job? You're obviously not a desk job type of person, but there are other
physically active jobs that a person could have: park ranger, construction worker, engineer of all sorts. Why do you do this? I mean, you rode your bike down the entire length of America and across the northern continent, and the world record attempts and all the other things you have going on now and in the future. What's the deal? Why?
Well, like you mentioned, there's lots of interesting physical jobs out there, and had I grown up on the coast, I'm sure I would have been a sailor of some sort. But it just so happens that my father, introduced me to cycle touring when I was at an impressionable age, and it's just through the years, the bike is what I've known as a way to channel my passion into my purpose.
What about fitness? Does that play a role in here? Do you do it to keep healthy and to keep fit, or do you exercise in other ways besides biking?
I do exercise in other ways. Like anyone doing any sport for any length of time, there's a certain amount of burnout that comes with doing repetitive things. So I enjoy running. I dabbled very briefly in triathlon. I found that swimming was not my forte. So I enjoy running and hiking, and but there's obviously a ton of different disciplines under cycling. So usually I alternate between road and mountain bike, and occasionally, very occasionally, Glenn, there is a weight workout thrown in there too, just for good measure.
Well, good. It is important to keep that core strong, and that's one thing I've noticed with a lot of people that are really into cycling or running is they don't do enough core exercise. And think about what the legs are attached to, the pelvis, and what's the pelvis attached to? The core. And if your core is weak, it's going to just throw everything off. You ever seen those guys riding their bikes, or women too, and they're bobbing their whole torso? That's a clear sign that their core is not strong enough to support the power from their legs.
Exactly. Yeah. And somewhere up the chain, I'm told the brain is also connected, and my dad often questions whether that's still the case for me. Yeah. All right, Ryan. Well, thank you once again. This has been a very scintillating conversation. It makes me want to get out there on my bike and find an adventure of my own. So awesome, Glenn, and congrats on the Lewis and Clark. Again, I'll have to come down for that sometime. Yeah,
you will. It was a lot of fun. So, all right, I will get the information out for your book so everybody can have a chance to win your book right after this, and then hopefully one lucky winner will get to read all about it, and several others will buy it to read it.
Excellent, Glenn. I look forward to connecting again.
All right, take care. Good luck on Tour Divide.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you, Ryan. That was really great stuff. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to tell us about your really adventureful lifestyle. It's fascinating. I'm sure a lot of us can only dream about doing the things that you do, but some of us actually do get out there and do it. And to all of you, I salute you. For those of you that don't but want to, I really strongly encourage it. I was in college after the Navy, and I was talking with a guy who was on a bike tour, and I told him that it was something I was thinking about doing, but thought I'd probably put it off a few years. And he said, "No, don't do it right now. Do it now. You will never have a better chance, because after you graduate college, then you have a job and a career you're trying to build up, maybe a spouse and maybe kids and more responsibilities." And he said, "You will never have a better chance than right now." I listened to him and I jumped at it, and I rode my bike from Fairbanks, Alaska down to almost Los Angeles, California. And it was really a trip of a lifetime. It was fantastic. I'm glad I did it. I am so glad I listened to that guy. So for all of you that are thinking about it, do it. Make it happen. There is no better time than right now. And maybe Ryan's book will help push you in the right direction, because once you have a life-changing experience like that, it doesn't go away. You have it forever. Now, if you want to win a copy of Ryan's book, A Purpose Ridden, all you have to do is leave a review for the Live Fit podcast on iTunes before June 28th. I will randomly select somebody who has left a review from today, May 25th, through Sunday, June 28th. And I will notify them on the newsletter that will come out 2 days later to tell them that they won, and they can let me know their address, and I will ship them out a book just for them. So to leave a review, go to livefitpodcast.com/review. That'll take you directly to my page on iTunes. Once again, livefitpodcast.com/review. If anybody wants to leave a review on Stitcher Radio, you can also find that very easily, livefitpodcast.com/Stitcher. Once again, I will have all of this information available on the show notes page at livefitpodcast.com/ep51. livefitpodcast.com, episode 51. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for reviewing. Thanks for subscribing, and just thanks. Have a great one. Bye.